My name is David F. Wilson, and you're listening to Dust, David's Ultimate Stone Talk, a podcast that aims to explore all aspects of the stone trade, from its ancient origins to its contemporary use as a medium of cultural and creative expression. My guest today is Joe Dinwiddie. Based in Santa Fe, New Mexico, Joe describes himself as an educator, an empowerer, and a craftsman. His stated mission is to inspire others through teaching them the craft of dry stone walling. Using stone upon stone to create a physical entity, for whatever reason, is a fundamental basic human skill. It has been a common building practice across millennia within many different cultures. It is definitely not a forgotten or dying craft, but it is under pressure like at no other time in history. The collapse of the stone trade from the mid-20th century and the subsequent growth of manufactured products has conspired in the demise of the conveyor belt of talent emerging into the trade. The traditional route into the craft of masters passing knowledge onto their apprentices is all but bust. This natural passing over of skill has many negative consequences, some obvious. Quality has dropped across many aspects of the craft. Those working within the trade are aging, and attracting the younger generation into it is getting harder. The pressure the trade is under also has secondary consequences, which are potentially more serious. As manufactured products gain market share, they further squeeze out the traditional tradesmen, who at times can be seen outdated, costly, and inefficient, despite history indicating quite the opposite. As stone is used less and less, especially within commercial situations, those professionals that are essential for support, clients, architects, structural engineers, they too have lost the knowledge and confidence in the material. It has become an unknown quantity to them. It is dismissed too readily and too early from consideration in many situations where it would be the ideal and best solution. That gap in understanding is a fundamental threat to the continuation of the craft as a major component of our built environment. Is all lost? Personally, I don't think so. But how do we arrest further deterioration and continuing loss of knowledge? Is that not the challenge to those of us who know the strength of the material and the technique? To educate to others the benefits, the opportunities, and personal rewards a career in the trade has to offer. Some do this by producing inspiring work, and it is something I am aiming to, in my own way, to do by developing this series of interviews. Other individuals, like Joe, are being more proactive and taking the message out through workshops and training. A UK DSWA certified instructor, Joe acknowledges education as a process. It's a generous, unselfish gift to others. Joe's passion is to share the gift of working with stone and the technique of dry stone walling to those that are willing to receive it. He strives to reach three key priority groups. Children, taking his knowledge of best practice directly into the school environment, using dry stone to help children explore maths, science, and the arts. At training workshops to adults, more focused on developing tangible skills to help them build, carry out repairs, and gain knowledge of the wider uses of stone within landscaping. He also acts as a stone consultant on large-scale municipal and commercial projects, bringing much-needed expertise and know-how to situations where it is sorely needed. Seeing the trade thrive has benefits for us all. This will only be achieved by raising the profile of the craft and bringing it to the attention of those unfamiliar with the rewards it has to offer. Education is central to that. I'm looking forward to hearing from Joe today about his motivations that has seen him move into this space, his successes, and what he sees as the challenges that still need to be addressed to achieving the wider knowledge and acceptance the craft needs to flourish. Hi, Joe. Good to speak to you.
Hello, David. Good morning. Thank you for having me on your program.
No problem at all. It's good to speak to you. So how are you doing?
I'm doing pretty well here. I'm talking to you from Santa Fe, New Mexico, here in February of 2021. And we don't have snow on the ground right here in Santa Fe, but the mountains above, which I'm looking at, that Santa Fe National Forest, has still got snow on it. So I was able to do some cross-country skiing up in the snow this past weekend.
You like getting out in the snow. We've just had some overnight, and no, I'll just stay indoors. Thanks very much. Dinwiddie, you've kind of got a connection with myself because you're Scottish.
Yes,
Scottish
yeah.
ancestry.
Yes, lots of Scottish ancestry. My father's side of the family are from Scotland. It was my great-great-grandfather who was born and raised near Dumfries, Scotland, and he immigrated to Kentucky with his wife. And I was the fifth generation to work on the diversified farm that he set up just adjacent to Mammoth Cave in central Kentucky. And every generation has stayed in touch. Even since he came to the United States. So I'm still in touch now with my current age group of relatives over there and their parents. And then I visited Scotland twice and lived there for a while. I was primarily doing biodynamic farm and garden work with special needs adults, but I did have a chance to do dry stone masonry on both trips over there, which was fantastic.
Is that the biodynamics? Is that by Rudolf Steiner?
Yes, that's exactly. Yeah,
It's a very interesting concept.
Yeah, it is. Yeah. I had learned about biodynamics in my 20s. I was apprenticing in Northern California with biodynamic farmers and heirloom seed savers and organic market gardeners. And part of Rudolf Steiner's work generated what are called Camp Hill communities. I think there's 70 to 80 of them around the world. And I went to live and work at one outside of Dumfries, Scotland, in the little village of Beeswing called Loch Arthur, which is just a phenomenal place and group of people doing vocational training, farming, gardening, I think woodworking, a creamery, other crafts there, weaving. Pretty unique opportunity. So it was great to be in a place where, one, everybody pronounced my last name correctly, and two, do such meaningful work. It was the most substantive work I've ever done.
There's also then quite a nice connection with my podcast and Rudolf Steiner, because he very much believed in using dust to regenerate and the land.
Yes, yeah. His interest in using different types, quartz, crushed up quartz was part of some of the biodynamic preparations. And then one of the farmers from whom I learned in Northern California, a gentleman by the name of Bob Kennard, was really keen on using crushed up rock powder to remineralize soils, essentially like a multivitamin. And that had a very significant influence in my interest in rocks, of all things, was using rock powder as I made compost and remineralized soil. And,
it makes sense when you think of it, doesn't it?
Yeah. I mean, that's, following the natural processes. That was the primary focus of Bob Kennard's farming methods, looking at how does Mother Nature make healthy soil, and then trying to do what we can to facilitate that. And crushed up rocks is part of it. So
I must admit, I do a bit of carving at the side of my house, and I sweep up the dust that I put on my garden. I don't know whether it has any benefits, but I try.
Yeah, I think it does. Yeah, even if it's calcium, like from the limestone, even calcium has a really beneficial effect on soil. So I'm a believer in the rock dust.
Good. So just for the listener, give them a little bit of kind of background of where you are in the world, just your kind of location and the sort of area you live in. It kind of just helps them place you in the world.
Certainly, I'd be glad to. Santa Fe is in northern New Mexico and in the southwestern region of the United States. And it's a fairly dry climate. In fact, right now, exceptionally dry. There's been a significant drought here in New Mexico for several years now. So it's a very dry, part desert climate here. There's certainly forests in the region. And Santa Fe is a really spectacular arts and crafts community. There's a lot of talented artists from a wide range of backgrounds based here in Santa Fe and in the region. Every type of visual art, performing arts is pretty popular here so far as what is offered. And Santa Fe is designated one of the UNESCO sites for, I think the designation is for arts and crafts or for culture, but some kind of designation about the arts and crafts.
Okay, we passed through Santa Fe on our travels, and yeah, I just loved the area. Just the colours and the landscape was just so alien to kind of what I'm used to. I just loved it. Maybe I could meet up with you there at some point.
That would be fantastic. And in fact, several people have used the word alien to describe the landscape here. Some of the rock formations here in northern New Mexico look like what you would see on the older Star Trek episodes when they would go to a planet, just by the nature of how the rocks are. And then, of course, in southern New Mexico, in the town of Roswell in the 1940s, something that might have been attributed to alien arrival happened. It was a UFO landing or something. So yeah, the word alien has definitely been used in this area.
I have a few little kind of quirky kind of questions just to kind of kick off as well. You get your choice of anybody, living or dead, to spend the day with to teach them the craft. Who would you choose? Who would you like to spend the day with? Historical figure that you just kind of, that there's a certain joy of being able to spend the day out. It gives you time to kind of focus and converse with the other person. Who would you choose to enjoy that with?
If I could spend a day with any person, and you said alive or have passed, I'd have to choose between two. It would either be Ansel Adams, who has had a very significant influence on me. I'm sitting next to his poster of the moonrise in New Mexico.
Not an original.
No, not an original. It's a poster. I would say Ansel Adams and Bob Dylan would be the two people I would most want to spend a day sharing the craft of dry stone and talking with.
Bob's quite into his craft. I think he'd be quite interested in that.
Yes. Plus all the metaphors, rock music and rock work. So yeah.
Maybe I could tag along for that day just to listen to the conversation.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, so that maybe answers my next question. So as you know, after a long, hard day working at the wall, we all kind of like to retire to the bar for a little bit of refreshment. So it's your turn on the jukebox, and you've got 50 cents to put in the jukebox. What would you put on?
Oh, boy, that's a tough one. At the end of a workday, what would I want to listen to? It's possibly, it would be blues or bluegrass would be choices. So blues, I'd say maybe Muddy Waters, or even soul singers like Otis Redding and Sam Cooke. And if it was bluegrass, the father of bluegrass music, Bill Monroe.
Bill Monroe, I like Bill Monroe. I like a bit of country, a bit of all that. It's good. And you play the banjo yourself?
Yes, I do play banjo. And in fact, Bill Monroe got me started on banjo. I saw him in concert in the late 1980s and shared, hey, I'm from Kentucky. Our family was from the county next to him. And when I mentioned my last name, he said, did your father play basketball for University of Kentucky? And I said, no, it was my Uncle Jim. And it turns out Bill Monroe is a lifelong University of Kentucky Wildcats basketball fan. And so it was really great to have a connection with him directly. And a gentleman had gotten up on stage to play banjo with Bill Monroe during the concert. This was in Iowa City, Iowa. And that guy's name was Bob Black. And Bob had been one of Bill Monroe's bluegrass boys in the mid-'70s and happened to live in Iowa City, where I was enrolled for my first year of university. And Bill Monroe introduced me to Bob Black and said, Bob, this is a fellow Kentuckian. He has just recently bought a new banjo and is wanting to learn bluegrass banjo.
That's fantastic.
Bob Black came to my dorm room every week for my freshman year of university to get me going on banjo. And then later I learned a different style of playing banjo, clawhammer banjo. And I grew up playing piano. And then most recently I've gotten into mandolin, which I'm really liking. It's much lighter than banjo and quieter. So I think as I'm aging, that has a certain appeal to it.
That makes me very jealous because there's some sort of disconnect between my brain and my fingers. I just can't pick up anything. I've had a go at playing the guitar, but it just won't work. It's too slow. The connection's too slow or broken some way.
Oh yeah. Well, you should be careful if you have that issue when you pick things up with your hands. Watch out for the chisel and the hammer.
I seem to have accomplished that. So.
Oh yeah, I have a permanent groove on my hand here from the times I've missed the chisel and hit the bone right there.
I try not to do that. It's very sore.
Yeah.
And then lastly, something that would surprise the listener about you or a guilty pleasure.
A surprise about me. Oh, that's a good question. A surprise about me. One of my greatest joys back in those days when I was learning about organic farming garden, that the very first time I made a successful compost pile that broke down into real crumbly black healthy compost, that was probably the biggest excitement of my 20s.
That is, funnily enough, I've been composting all year with the hope that I've got some at the end of, to use this year. So
it's so fun and empowering. It's almost like alchemy. To take all those different materials and turn it into something completely different is very exciting.
Yeah, I don't have much access to brown material. That's I have a fear that I'm not getting the mix correct. There might be too much nitrogen in mine. So, but we'll see.
For brown material, I've crushed up leaves to use, not from a walnut tree, but pretty much all other types of trees. And then I've gotten untreated sawdust from woodworkers, stuff that isn't been glued, no paint, no stains or anything. So sometimes if I wasn't generating enough dry material, I'll go and try and get leaves or sawdust or something brown. I've shredded newspaper, and those kinds of things. Anyhow.
Yeah. So do you still garden then?
Yes, I've only got one garden bed here in Santa Fe. And the one thing about gardening here is you have to water every day. I think last year we might have had 12 days where there was rain total. There wasn't much rain here, and so watering every day is for sure part of the garden. Last year I primarily had a mix of heirloom sunflowers and then varieties of kale.
I like your greens.
Yeah.
Have you always been in Santa Fe, or did you grow up in Kentucky then?
Yeah, I grew up in Kentucky. I was born in Louisville, Kentucky, and moved around quite a bit for different reasons. I was in Northern California for a while, both for college and then to do organic farm and garden work. Came back to Kentucky and did 7 years of dry stone work in the central Kentucky area. Moved to Pennsylvania, did stonework there for several years, then North Carolina, and then moved to Santa Fe about a year and a half ago. I had lived here during college summers. I had a job at a conference center here that my grandparents had been involved in founding back in the early 1950s. So our family had worked here and lived here in the summers intermittently for several decades. I was the third generation family member, this is my mom's side of the family, to work at the conference center here near Santa Fe. So, and I had visited it pretty much my whole life, family trips, and once I read that Ansel Adams biography and saw his picture of the moonrise in New Mexico and read about the art scene here, I took a train out and I fell in love with it. I was in my teens. So it just took me 30 years to get back.
Okay, so you've always kind of wanted to end up there then?
Yeah, in some ways. I think I might have had 25 years in the Appalachian Mountains, and I had, I think, 5 years in Northern California, sort of in those mountains. And so here I am in the other mountain range.
And so what facilitated the move to Santa Fe then? Work or? Just the lifestyle change.
Partly a desire for a drier climate. After 25 years in central and southern Appalachia, the amount of days working in the rain and issues related to that. Twice I traveled out of town for work, and both trips when I returned home, the dehumidifier that I had running was not functioning, and everything literally in my house molded. And so I had to get rid of a lot of my personal possessions. And the second time that happened, the mold inside our family upright piano, which I had, the mold got so bad that when the people came to assess the damage in the house professionals, they said, "You're going to have to get rid of it." They said, "There's no way to." And the day I drove that family piano to the Habitat for Humanity resale store is the day I decided to move to a drier climate. It was very traumatic for me. Anyhow, so moving out here, partly the drier climate, and then as my stonework has evolved through the years, the Chaco Canyon site on the poster over my shoulder has had a very big influence on my stonework for just about 20 years now. And part of my reason in wanting to be here, I live 2 hours from Chaco Canyon now, was because of my intrigue with the Native American stonemasonry built in this area, 1,000 years old and older, almost all of which is aligned in very complex architecture with the full range of lunar cycle and solar cycle and cardinal directions. And my stonework has gone in that direction since I first learned about Chaco 20 years ago. So I'm close to it. That's part of it, is the stonework and the petroglyphs. Just downstream, I live adjacent to the Santa Fe River, and just downstream in Santa Fe River is a massive petroglyph site with over 4,500 petroglyphs. So being in a place that's this vibrant culturally, that I'm familiar with, that has, petroglyphs and archaeoastronomy are two of my passions, and this is kind of the nucleus of that so far as my interests.
So, moving on from your childhood, so you mentioned you went to university. What did you go to university to study then? Because you didn't just jump into stonework. I quite like to find out how you ended up at stonework. So there's a journey there that it would be nice to explore.
I studied I went to 5 schools. I had 5 different undergraduate majors. My stepfather called it graduate school because it took me a while. I stretched it out. I'd work and travel. Primarily, I initially went to school to study writing, English and writing and journalism. And then switched for a while when I was in California. I was a horticulture major. And in that context, I studied with the farmer Bob Kennard at the junior college in Santa Rosa, California. And then when I returned to Kentucky and got into doing stonework, after I'd started stonework, I decided to go back and finish college. I finished at Berea College in central Kentucky. And there I developed an independent major, one of my own creation, in Appalachian Studies. So I designed 2 years of coursework that satisfied the requirements the college had, and also I took, I think, every class the college had on a topic related to Appalachian Studies.
You did dry stone walling for a while. Was that through family or requirement to earn some money, or?
That's always been part of the work, the latter. Well, when I came back to Kentucky after my years doing farm work in California, Richard Tufnell had just come to Kentucky he was living outside of Dumfries, Scotland that time. He was involved with doing some very amazing municipal scale projects in Kentucky. And one of the projects that he did was the restoration of a massive dry stone retaining wall holding up a road in the very park where I grew up. This was a park designed by the American landscape architect Frederick Law Olmsted. These parks, several parks that circle Louisville, Kentucky, were designed by him. And this dry stone retaining wall on the road was part of the original design. And after around 100 years, the wall started to fail. And Richard Tufnell led a crew to completely redo the wall, take it all the way apart, put it back, save the city $100,000 or so. And it was right where I grew up. So I knew that wall my entire life. And my parents showed me a newspaper article about Richard and the wall. So I signed right up. That's all I needed.
There was a call out for volunteers or helpers, was there?
Well, when I moved to Brea, I asked about who was doing traditional work like stonework. And Richard had trained a couple of people in dry stone masonry who lived in that area. And there was another stonemason, a third generation stonemason, who happened to live there. And so I first started working with that group of people: Mark Martin, George Oberst, Frank Jenkins. I worked with another gentleman from Scotland named Richard McAllister. So those four were my mentors. I apprenticed with that group of stonemasons, dry stonemasons, for 7 years. And Richard Tufnell was there intermittently leading workshops and doing projects. So I was fortunate to be able to attend his presentations on dry stone masonry and worked with him on a municipal project, which was just fantastic. So really, Richard Tufnell had a significant influence on the revival of dry stone masonry throughout that region, central Kentucky, Lexington, Kentucky. They were expanding 2-lane roads into 4-lane roads. So intermittently for the 7 years I did work, we stripped out fences, scooted them back 25 feet to both sides, and rebuilt them using the best known practices which Richard had introduced to us. And he had worked in 40, 50 countries before coming to Kentucky. So his global perspective was just, it was exciting for one. And it was very helpful to think about, if you're going to strip out something and rebuild it, how can you build it? How can you place the stones to try and make it last the longest? So it was a really unique opportunity. I was, just finishing college, Brea College, signed right up, and definitely did it for money. It was good work. And I had a grueling schedule. I went to graduate school at the University of Kentucky after I finished Brea College to earn a master's degree in vocational education. And I was doing dry stone work during the days and taking my graduate school classes at night. And it was very challenging to stay awake sitting in the classroom at the end of a day of doing dry stone work.
I could imagine.
I did that for 2 years and managed to pull it off.
So you've now managed to combine those two kind of interests, your kind of vocational training and your dry stone walling.
Yeah, and Kentucky was a ripe environment to bring those two together. When I initially signed up to do the master's degree in vocational education, I naively thought I would be able to teach organic farming, biodynamics, heirloom seed saving. I wanted to teach those through what's called the Cooperative Extension Service here. That's the agricultural educational outreach that every state in the United States has. It's a nationwide service with statewide branches. And I was wanting to teach what I had learned all those years in California and elsewhere. I wanted to teach that through the Extension Service. Organics wasn't big at that point. This would have been the late 90s. But what was practical was using vocational education can be teaching anything involving how to do this or how to do that. And dry stone masonry was the perfect fit. So the same year I graduated with the master's in vocational ed, the Dry Stone Walling Association sent maybe a half dozen people to Kentucky. They came and led a range of workshops. And one of the workshops which I took was certification as a dry stone walling instructor. I'd been doing dry stone maybe 5 years by that point and had just done my master's in vocational ed. And the man who led the workshop also had his degree in vocational education. I want to say his name was Paul Webley. So we did a 2 or 3 day workshop to learn how to teach dry stone. And then the other gentlemen from the different countries of Great Britain led workshops on walling. And one of the most interesting things was we went on a van tour. It was like a party bus. And we went to look at historic dry stone fences throughout central Kentucky. And that group of stonemasons from Wales, Ireland, Scotland, England, they could identify the regions that the style of dry stone was from Great Britain. And none of us knew anything about that. We never really thought that the way the copes are or all the
sort
other
of regional
styles.
styles.
Yeah, when it was exciting for us to learn about that.
Yeah, there's a history within those walls as well then.
Yeah, and the ones that were from parts of Scotland, of course, I got super excited about because of my Dinwiddie Scottish ancestry. So that was fantastic.
Was that through the Dry Stone Conservancy?
Sort of. The Dry Stone Conservancy, I think, organized the trainings, but to my recollection, everybody that came was part of the Dry Stone Walling Association. So it was sort of a mixture of the Dry Stone Conservancy in Kentucky and the Dry Stone Walling Association. Like the certificate I got for the teacher certification was specifically from the Dry Stone Walling Association. So those two organizations, at least at that point, had some interaction together.
And it's mostly limestone in Kentucky then?
It's a mixture of limestone and sandstone. Those are the primary bedrocks there.
And why is Kentucky a kind of centre for stone walling? Other areas don't have that kind of tradition.
Well, some areas do maybe different looks, like in New England, Connecticut, and those areas, they definitely have a dry stone walling tradition up there. In central Kentucky, the primary reason I believe that the dry stone walling had a revival was that there was so much of it. There was a significant amount of immigrant stonemasons from Great Britain who settled in central Kentucky. Hence all those different styles of the dry stone fences, miles and miles and miles.
So these as boundaries or to clear the fields? Or
primarily, my understanding is they were boundaries, either agricultural fields to either keep livestock in or keep livestock out, depending on what they were growing. And then horse farms, of course, that became part of the agricultural community in central Kentucky. So both for animals, any kind of livestock, and then for agriculture, the dry stone fences lined roads were borders of agricultural fields. We also had a lot of municipal dry stone projects, bridge abutments, retaining walls, those kinds of things. It was throughout the parks. So the volume of dry stone work that needed, once the city of Lexington decided to expand those roads, it was mandatory to move the fences back. But because of their historic nature and their proximity to horse farms, the State Department of Transportation hired Richard Tufnell to come over and to help get those projects underway and to do trainings to generate more people who could do good work.
So they were keen, the sort of authorities were keen to retain the walls. They didn't want to just kind of dig them up and bury the material. They were keen to kind of keep that as a tradition going in the area.
Yeah, I would say authorities combined with horse farm owners. These were the borders of the front of their horse farms. And probably historic preservation types of organizations. Again, I was just starting right when that revival was underway, so I didn't really know all of the things, but what I saw and participated in was municipal projects, sometimes commercial projects, a lot of residential, including horse farms, a lot of residential projects of dry stone masonry. It was common, and maybe because of the types of bedrock. We had stone that was fairly easy to shape and set everywhere.
And the majority of the work was dry stone. It wasn't sort of mortared masonry?
No, I don't ever remember doing any mortared masonry for the commercial projects. That was pretty much all dry stone. I mean, not commercial, municipal. The highways and bridge abutments, all of that was dry stone. Occasionally, for commercial or residential projects, we would do mortared work, but the focus was pretty much dry stone. That's what I wanted to. That was my main interest. So I tended to follow the crews who were doing dry stone.
And so when did the sort of desire to, start to do the training, when did that kind of kick in?
I
What was the
think that
motivation for that?
I think the first one. You wait for me or in
For
Kentucky?
yourself, yes.
Um, what was my desire? Well, I wanted to learn how to build a house out of stone. And I had read some books by a couple from New England. I think they lived in Vermont and Maine, called Helen and Scott Nearing. And Helen and Scott Nearing were homesteaders for decades, and they wrote several books about building their own house and their own greenhouse and their stone walls around their gardens. They were doing mortared stonework. And I had gotten interested in their writings while I was doing gardening and homesteading and stuff in California. And in reading their books, I became very interested in the idea of learning how to build a stone greenhouse. And then that involved, I thought, oh, I'll build my own stone house. I never have learned how to do that or done that. But because when I got to Kentucky and said, hey, I want to learn traditional stonework, many of those people knew about the Nearings. But the Nearings were doing the slip form method, where you put in plywood walls and you drop mortar and stones in. I never have learned that style of work. And everybody said, forget that. We have this revival of dry stone masonry that has just now started. And so that's why, it was the right place at the right time.
And did you take to it quite easily?
I don't know if I could say I did. The working as an apprentice, I had to kind of work my way up to get into the craft level. Like my first summer doing it, all I did was move stone in a wheelbarrow. We had all the limestone pieces dumped at the top of the property, and because of access, we had to move tons and tons and tons of limestone by wheelbarrow down this narrow path on a slope. So my job was to keep my first three mentors supplied with face stones. So I would pick them out of the pile, put them in the wheelbarrow, take them over there, and then stack them like books on a shelf behind each mason. And that's all I did. And maybe some gravel for where they were working to stand on, because of course it's Kentucky, it rains all the time. And that's all I did. So it was great exercise, but I was watching really gifted craftsmen, but I wasn't really learning it. So it took a while before I started shaping and setting face stones and that.
Going through that process sorts out the people who will endure, because if you can do that for days on and weeks on end, you're committed. I've had so many people going, you'll bring them on for a couple of days and you'll get them moving stone and they'll go, well, what am I going to be doing tomorrow? The same as you're doing today, and they never turn back up.
Yeah. No, it was a good model. It was great exercise.
Yeah, that's the way I always looked at it.
Yeah, good exercise. And then the people I was learning from, it was a unique circumstance. They were such phenomenally gifted craftsmen, just right place at right time. And so watching them and, good people to be around and then learning the craft, there were so many different projects going on and also different crews. There were a couple of different crews of dry stone mason, largely due to what Richard Tufnell had helped get underway there. And so I ended up working on, on a couple of those. Richard McAllister's crew, he probably has the largest crew of dry stone masons in central Kentucky. He has a really successful dry stone work, and he was in one of those very original trainings in the mid-90s, 95, 96, that Richard Tufnell had led, and all those guys got it great. And then one of my mentors, Frank Jenkins, he was a third generation mason doing brick and stone masonry, and I just happened to fall in with that group of really skilled people. So it was great as an apprentice to be watching and learning from people who really knew the craft well and were passionate about doing it well. So it was fantastic. Steady work, decent pay.
And were they keen to bring you on, to bring your skills on? Were they keen to teach you?
Yeah, I didn't have much skills other than showing up sober, ready to do hard work. I didn't know anything about stonework. I knew hard work from doing farm and garden and landscape stuff, so I didn't mind that part at all. So other than being willing to work and know to say what's next if I finish one task, so yeah, that was that was part of it, and I was so interested in it. And then I did my first test. The Richard Tufnell set up a testing scheme for dry stone masonry, more or less based on what the Dry Stone Walling Association does. And I did my very first test in 2000, I think. Yeah, it would have been 2000. And I had to build a 10-foot long section of dry stone fence. It was, I think, limestone. And at 4.5 feet tall, I had 24 hours. So I had 2 8-hour days and then a 7-hour day to complete that section, 10-foot long section of dry stone fence, 4.5 feet tall. And that helped me gauge how much tonnage per day can I set properly. That was really good test. I got a bump in pay for getting that first level certificate. There were all kinds of, and I still have the photographs. I had to photograph every step of it as I built it to send to the inspectors. And I think the inspectors were a combination of Dry Stone Conservancy people, and it seems like there was somebody from the Dry Stone Walling Association, but I can't. Richard Tufnell had left by that point, and it was prior to Neil Rippingdale coming on. So it was Dry Stone Conservancy was going through their growing pains, and my test fell into that. And then it was a year later of doing the certification as an instructor with the crew from Great Britain.
So again, you've kind of not really bottomed out your motivation for wanting to get into teaching. I'd kind of like to kind of understand that.
Sure. Well, let's see. The motivation to get into teaching. Once I started doing the farm and garden work out west in Northern California, a couple of the places that I worked had classes, both for kids and adults, in different aspects. So while out there, I had led one-day workshops on composting and one on heirloom seed saving, companion planting, double digging. And many of those people that I learned from out there were really good educators. Bob Kennard, who taught at the Santa Rosa Junior College, he taught there for 20 years. Phenomenally gifted farmer and educator. So he modeled good teaching. A gentleman in Willits, California, John Jevons, who's a very accomplished biointensive gardener with the double digging and companion planting and that. I learned from him, took classes that he taught. So I had already seen some good teaching. And in fact, the banjo teacher, Bob Black, who I learned banjo from in Iowa, was an amazingly gifted teacher. Not just a great banjo player, which he was, but he had really well-written tablature and very thorough and patient and that. So I think having good teachers through the years maybe was an inspiration in some way.
So the qualities that you were seeing and getting back from them, you wanted to impart to others. You wanted to kind of be like them.
Yeah, in some
Is that the
way,
motivation?
Yeah, I think they modeled for me both the inspiration about what they were doing and conveying the information. So that combo, yeah, and I really felt like it was important to, again, my goal in getting the vocational ed degree, to teach the organics, and because that was not what was being taught through Kentucky's cooperative. They were teaching commercial agriculture with monocropping and heavy chemical usage and other things. And I was wanting to get into that large education network to try and start to teach some other older, proven ways of agriculture. So that was the initial thing. Couldn't make much headway. Kentucky didn't want to teach that, but there were dry stone workshops everywhere. So that is how that shift evolved, I think.
And so what was your training for to become a trainer? What did that involve? What was the kind of skill, or what was the message they were trying to get across to you to be able to impart into the people that you would be teaching?
That's a really good question. When I did the weekend workshop with the Dry Stonewalling Association, the gist of what they were teaching was the effectiveness of ways to teach. And their test for us, what we had to do to complete the course and earn the certification, we had to leave the building where the thing was going on, go outside, and we had to learn a skill that wasn't stonemasonry from stonemason. And then we had to go back into the classroom building and teach what we had just learned moments before to the group. And then whoever taught it to us, you had a rubric, a criteria of what should be in. And I was really fortunate. The gentleman, Dave Kinley, who I
I've met
up
Dave.
partnering with. Yeah, Dave and I did dry stone work together for several years there in central Kentucky. He had a copper moonshine still in his truck bed. And his work prior to dry stone, he had a hardware store, so he knew all about making copper tubing and all that. And he had an incredibly well-built copper moonshine still in the bed of his truck. And so he taught me all the process of how you build it and then how you make the moonshine. We didn't make it, of course. And so then I had to go back into the people taking the class and teach the class how to make moonshine. And then I taught Dave Kinley how to play banjo. So since he was my partner, I had a 5-string banjo with me. I think that's how it worked out. And I had to teach him the basics of how to do some banjo playing. And so he had to go back in front of the group and show that. So anyhow, so the focus was on how to effectively teach no matter what the content is for Dry Stonewalling Association. And then the master's degree in vocational ed, what University of Kentucky was teaching was about diverse ways of learning. For example, some people might learn better if they're watching a movie. Some might learn better if it's a hands-on tactile project. Some people learn better from listening. Some learn best from reading. So about the best ways known to reach whatever your audience is. So that was the bulk of the vocational ed program, all the different media that can be used, and then what kind of content to be in those media. You tell people, one's idea was for your learners, you tell them in advance, we're going to talk about A, B, and C. And then first we're going to talk about A. Now that we finish talking about A, we're going to talk about B. Now that we finish talking about A and B, we're going to talk about C. Now the way ideas of really emphasizing through whatever it was, video, audio, written, hands-on, how to most effectively try and get the information and inspiration over. It's fantastic. University of Kentucky had a really good, half my classes were in agricultural education and the other half were maybe in just general education kind of classes.
And how have you then taken those skills, those kind of exercises into your own workshops teaching dry stone walling?
Oh, in every way. Pretty much everything I learned in those programs I incorporate into my teaching, whether it's K through 12 students, kindergarten through 12th grade, or adults. Pretty much everything.
Lead us through give us a kind of general overview of how you would start a kind of a training workshop.
For adults or for kids?
Just to do it for adults, to start with.
Yeah. So a normal workshop for teaching a class on dry stone, we'll meet indoors first and hand out literature. I have a 1-page fact sheet that talks about the major topics of, types of tools, types of stone, the methodology, further resources. I'll spread out books on a table in magazines. Tomas Lip's Stone Excess magazine, I've got a bunch of issues of that I spread out, and different books related to dry stone. Some of them from Dry Stonewalling Association, some about Andy Goldsworthy, some about Dan Snow. There's a couple of authors over here in the United States that have written about dry stone. So whatever I can put out there. Ed Bertinsky's book on quarries, I feel like that's important to, understand. If you're quarrying stone, this is what it looks like. So lots of literature. And I'll do an overview of what we're going to do for the day. Then I just kind of go over all of the basics. What are the types of stone on Earth? And which kinds are good for what? I'll ask people to share what they want to make when they go back home. And so I try it's usually retaining walls is number one, steps maybe number two, and then flat work like patios, walkways, landings. Those are the primary things people want to learn. So talk about types of stone, then tools to move stone like a wheelbarrow, a hand truck, rollers, a come along. Tools to shape stone. I spread out all the hammers. I pass them around so everybody can fondle them and see what they're like, different weights, whether they have carbide tips, pass around chisels, look at all the tools, and then talk about methodology. What are the best known practices for people wanting to do dry stone work? What are the specific steps people can do to make their projects look good, last long, meet what their goals are, all that kind of stuff. And then I have people do some math. I always offer coffee right before that part, David. Because you're sitting down, it's a Saturday morning, and I say math, and right away some of the eyes close. But I like to go over the math. I hand out graph paper so people can draw out what is the specific project they want to do at home when they finish the class. For example, if it's a retaining wall, that's the number one thing. So I'll give people the dimensions of an average retaining wall, 3 feet tall, and ask them to draw it on graph paper according to everything we've talked about, foundations, through stones, the batter. And then after everybody draws it, I have them all hold it up. And that's one of the funniest parts of teaching the classes. Almost every drawing is different. And then we look at each of the drawings to see, well, why does one have a batter and another? Just it helps us kind of bring back home what we talked about with the methodology. Go over the formulas for tonnage, length times width times height. Over here in the United States, it's cubic feet. So a cubic foot of stone, if it has 170 pounds, hopefully your program has an automatic metric converter that shows up when I say those things. But, what's the math? And then also helping people do math related to their project. How much will it cost? That's some important math. If you pay $300 per ton of stone to get it delivered, how much tons is, that, and how much tonnage they could expect to set per day. So get all the math done. And then we go outside and do a hands-on project. Sometimes a sitting wall, sometimes a retaining wall, sometimes restorations. And then at the
what kind of size do you aim for your workshop?
It depends on the crowd. You mean the crowd of people or the size of the project?
The size of the number of people that you would be an ideal workshop.
Yeah, if it's just me, ideal would be 10. Some workshops I've done where there's more people, I'll work with a second instructor.
Because it must be like spinning plates, trying to keep an eye on everybody.
Yeah, it is sort of, but after this amount of time, I'm able to take in pretty quickly what is or isn't happening. That's one of the things. As soon as I'm aware that there's not a sound being made, like a hammer striking a stone or a hammer strike, sometimes I can tell what's happening when there's no sound. I know to look over in that direction to see, is it break time or what's going on?
Somebody's scratching their head.
Yeah, I do pay attention, up and down a project. So 10 people ideally if it's just me, and if it's more than 10, another instructor, just to make sure everybody's, one, safe, and two, learning. So yeah, I think
And
10
how
people.
do you cover the kind of health and safety issues with trying to keep an eye on 10 people? Do you get them to sign a disclaimer if they hit their knuckle, it's not it's their own fault?
Some places I have done that. Most often I've taught workshops either at a school, like a K through 12 school or college, or at a nonprofit organization that owns their own property. And sometimes I have had disclaimers, but I talk about safety as part of my classroom part. I show them a first aid kit. Talk about body mechanics, so far as lifting stones. Everybody in a workshop has to have safety glasses and snug fit work gloves. That's a prerequisite. If they don't have glasses, they're not out there doing the stonework. So I'm really keen on that. I've been trained in first aid and CPR a couple of times, done my certification in that. And since I tend to get injured on my own job sites often, I always put orange caps if there's a stake sticking out of the ground. And my first aid kit is brightly colored and everybody knows where it is. And then part of that on safety, that's a really good question because safety is really important to me. For example, one of the things to do if you're going to lift a stone with another person, I try to emphasize how important it is to be communicating with that person, such as, let's lift on 3. 1, 2, 3. That is important. And then when you're setting a big one down, to know to count and say fingers out, or to put a piece of a hammer handle or a 2x4 of wood or another rock, so that when you set down a big one, there's something to catch it so that you can get that kind of stuff. And then just the communication is so important on if you're wrestling a big one, walking it across the ground, let's turn it to my left, now to your right, One of the most effective ways that I came up with in teaching about the communication, if you're doing stonework with others, it's so important, is that I teach a traditional folk dance called grand right and left through, and that's when you put everybody in a big circle, and two people are facing each other, and you take your partner's right hand and you pull them past your right shoulder, and then you take the next person's left hand and pull them by your shoulder. And the idea is that you keep going around the circle in the same direction. You're walking all the time, alternating right, left, right, left. And it really takes people a while to get that. But what it does is drive home a couple things. One, when you're wrestling rocks, you might be touching another person, so get used to it. Because you're grunting and groaning in the mud to move a big one. You got to get people desensitized. And then also just thinking about what is your left and what is somebody else's right. So the grand right and left through, that's a traditional folk dance. Who knows where that's from? That's been one of the best ways to help and convey the importance of communication as it coordinates with body movement.
I'm sure that gets the diverse personalities within a workshop to kind of bond together. A bit of fun.
Yeah, it is fun. It is fun. The very first time I did that was the very first time I had a workshop that was only men. Usually, it's a mix of men and women taking classes. And I had a workshop at Penland School of Crafts in North Carolina. It was 12 guys. The nature of communication amongst guys, some are real big burly guys and stuff, I just had to come up with some way that we would get used to one touching each other, because when I said that, you could have heard a pin drop. And then learning how to go ahead and talk more than what you might be used to, because we were doing a project of steps during that. It was a week-long workshop, and those steps weighed 400 to 500 pounds each. So when you're walking something like that with somebody else, your margin for error before an accident happens is really narrow. Something that heavy, you can lose it's a safety thing. So that was the first time I did that. I said, you guys, I got to get used to touching each other, and now I'm going to have you dance with one another. And anyhow, so at first they were all like, what are you talking about? And then we did it. It was fun, and everybody did great. We happened to have a retired Army doctor in the class with us, which was really reassuring, moving those big ones and stuff. So anyhow, so those a typical class. And then at the end, I always do evaluation and assessment. for every class, every age group. What did you learn? Was it practical? Was it was a good return on investment for your time and money? Did all your questions get answered? That kind of stuff, just to make sure. And I keep notes of that. That's all in writing. I hand out a sheet, an evaluation assessment sheet. And then as I continue to teach, I try and include those good suggestions and feedback from participants so that my ways of teaching and that hopefully are improving as a result of the feedback that participants share.
And has anybody from within one of those workshops went on to develop a career within dry stone walling?
Several. Yeah, and several also will take the workshop and they're already doing landscaping. So they want to learn more about doing stone.
Passing the skill on to somebody else must feel very rewarding.
Oh, yes, it is. Yeah, it really is. Because one, I enjoy it. And two, I do feel like it's important. I feel like stonework in the grand picture of this planet is a significant craft. And it's important for me to, one, recognize how significant stonework is from the past, like at Chaco Canyon and elsewhere, but also to think about where is that trade, whether you're building big things like pyramids or whether you're doing a single step out your back door. Ways to build things that look good and that last as long as what we know how.
You touched on earlier, you have actually gone into schools and you're actually teaching dry stone techniques within schools to children.
Yes.
Could you tell us a bit more about that?
Yeah, that's a blast. I really enjoy that. I started doing kindergarten through 12 artist residencies, and that's when a craftsperson or artist goes into a school and might spend 2 weeks with students sharing whatever their art or craft is. And it could be storytelling, pottery, metalworking, woodworking, weaving, painting, all the range of arts. And I started doing artist residencies in 2004 when I lived in Pennsylvania. And the state of Pennsylvania had a phenomenal teaching artist program. It was one of the best ones in the country so far as funding per school district or something like that. Incredible group of artists, teaching artists there. And so in the wintertime, it was snow and cold. My first winter I did dry stone work, and I thought, the hell with that. I want some indoor work for the wintertime up there. It was brutal, So I started working in the schools, K through 12. And to teach stonework, what I try to do is use stonework to help teach math, science, art, social studies, and language arts. Those are kind of the 5 larger themes of different specific topics taught in schools here.
That sounds like a very enlightened education curriculum, which we don't really have across here. Is that well rewarded? Is that well paid for your input into that?
I wouldn't say well paid as a teaching artist. That's not something that there's lots of money available for. But the reward of having fun teaching kids about stonework and that reward tenfold. It's not so much, I'm going to do this and make a lot of money. Most of those programs do have funding for that. But the real reward is doing it. So the last artist residency that I did, which was in Western Pennsylvania, the focus was on stonemasonry. And one of the ways that I'm teaching it, I've made a little 3-dimensional stone arch puzzle that I can take into the classroom. I've got several of them. And that's a way where the students will get together in groups and they'll build a dry stone arch with basically the way we do them. There's a form and some shims and a base that holds it together. And then once that's put together, we talk about, well, why does that arch stand up? It looks like magic, but what is it? What's the science of that? So we talk about friction, talk about gravity, The current model of the puzzles I'm using are made of stone. So we talk about, oh, this is sandstone. Well, how is sandstone formed, and where did it come from? And and then I've modeled the arch on a protractor. Most classrooms, at least here in the United States, have these plastic protractors that are 6 inches diameter. So I've used a stone arch puzzle, and I make it in the shape of a protractor so that as soon as it's built, students can put a protractor on it and do some math problems like the angles of, I have 13 identical keystone shaped pieces. Well, what's the angle on that? So using it to, and then looking at the, let's see, that's the math and the science and art. What are the shapes in that arch puzzle? There's a semicircle. Well, where else do we see that? And looking at also, I have 13 keystones to talk about lunar cycle, the 13 annual cycles of that. And then, so there's all the astronomy. And the half circle looks like a sunset or a half moon. So we talk about astronomy, talk about stonework as it relates to astronomy, in particular the World Heritage Sites. So you're able to do some things online. This is back in the days where you were in a classroom in a school that had a computer lab. We would go into the UNESCO World Heritage Site, the website, and I would ask students, pick a stone structure somewhere around the world off that website and make a brochure to promote why would people want to go travel there. So things like that, looking at World Heritage Sites. UNESCO is a scientific and cultural organization, so try to use some online learning.
That sounds like a great approach. And do the children really respond to that?
Oh yeah, especially doing artwork, making a trifold brochure, that's fun. You get out crayons and then seeing things. And then what I've did this last residency in the school, it was a kindergarten through 5th grade school in Western Pennsylvania. We looked at how stonework around the world is used to mark astronomy and cardinal directions. And so I said to students, if we're going to do something like that here at your school, what would you want to mark? And this was 5th grade math and science students. And what they wanted to mark, this was so funny, I loved it, it was perfect. They wanted to mark where is the winter solstice happened to be their last day of school before their 2-week holiday vacation. So they wanted to mark where is the sun in the sky on the winter solstice, where, make a mark on the school ground so that they'll know it's
freedom.
Time for, yes, exactly. Then we did the same for equinox because their spring break, March 21st happened to be the equinox. So we made a marking for that. And then for summer break, they happened to get out at the summer solstice. So I think we used a flagpole for one of the shadows. We went outside because I was there just before winter solstice. So we made observations on the ground of what shadows were where on the ground on December 21st. We were there. So the kids were really motivated. They had markings, permanent stonework on the grounds of the school to let them know when they're out for holiday break, for spring break, for summer break. And then we also made something, we talked about stone sundials because they get out of school at like 3 o'clock. How could you use the sun marked on a rock to let you know, hey, school's out today? So they were very motivated to succeed in the accuracy. We used compasses, we used computer programs, and then with that school, with multiple teachers and other teaching artists, we developed an outdoor learning classroom for their courtyard space to not only incorporate everything that I was trying to talk about using stonework to teach science, but multiple other teaching artists also were involved. So the idea was that you could have your classrooms outdoors, but deliberately designed the components of the outdoor classroom, deliberately designed for teaching purposes. So that was really fantastic. It was dream come true.
That sounds like an absolutely brilliant project, and also how stone can be this catalyst for so many other things if you look at it creatively, and the amount of different things that it can cover and encompass. That sounds brilliant. It sounds like something that could be taken or developed through into other schools. You've kind of proven the worth of it.
Yeah, that's, I agree with you. That was the school's plan, David. This, because of the pandemic and that, things have changed. But the plan for that school was to set up a camera system around this educational courtyard where that school could share their observations of what went on in that space with schools elsewhere. And so that I thought was a great idea, on ways to collaborate with other, all that technology is there.
Yeah, and
So
it sounded like you made education really fun for those kids.
yes, yes, and they made it fun, David. Those ideas they came up with to mark every day they get to go out for vacation. That was all them,
They really
So
bought into that, didn't
yeah,
they?
yeah, they made it fun. Fantastic.
That sounds great. I hope that I take it you're going to try and hopefully develop that as an
Yeah, we
idea
have
once the pandemic.
a landscape architect has drawn up the plans and that, and I think right now, because things are so uncertain with schools and funding and all of that, it looks great on paper right now. But the stonework we're planning to do for that region of western Pennsylvania has a lot of dry stone furnaces. And there is a historic, not working dry stone furnace close to the school. So we went on a field trip to look at it. And one of the goals in the outdoor classroom is to build a replica of that dry stone furnace that's near the school, but to make it a functioning wood-fired oven or even a gas oven, so that other classes can use it for cooking and things like that. So one stone thing was going to be that. Then we had a layout on the ground of different diameters of circles to show the solar system out of stone. I think a stone amphitheater that was oriented towards cardinal directions, so there were several components of it, that we were able to draw what the students had learned about World Heritage Sites and in the local stonework, that furnace.
I just love the way that you've developed your skill from, a basic, what you would call a stone fence, into this it's become this totally different thing. It just shows you the strength of the material and the technique that's so flexible that it can be doing other things. I
Yeah,
think that's really inspirational.
yeah, well, I appreciate your affirmation and acknowledging that. Yeah, the dry stone fences, that was really the catalyst for everything, at least what I'm doing professionally, was that I still get excited about those every now and then. But yeah, taking that and then being able to use that, looking at it globally and ways that it's been used and abused, and what other things have been done. And I think from the initial thing of fences, that combined, like I said, Richard Tufnell worked in a lot of countries and he was familiar with a range of World Heritage Sites. And then when I came to Chaco Canyon, shortly after they had been designated a World Heritage Site, and there was some information about other World Heritage Sites that were built the same time as the stonework at Chaco. And that really got me interested. I thought, oh, what other stonework was happening on the opposite side of the planet at the same time as this? And interestingly, a lot of those features have a lot of things in common. How they're built, like methodology, like woven corners. If they're oriented towards astronomy, which is pretty much universally yes. Things like that. So I think the World Heritage Sites, my learning about them, greatly broadened my sense of the stonemasonry craft.
And what it could be, yeah.
And what it could be, yeah.
One of the other things that I'd quite like to touch on is that you have been a consultant as sort of on municipal projects.
Yes, yeah, and some of those also working. For example, in Berea, the town of Berea, Kentucky, I wasn't a consultant on the project, but I was a dry stone mason on a municipal project where a group of us had formed sort of a guild. There was a loose Kentucky Guild of Dry Stone Masons. And a concrete block wall in the downtown historic part of Berea had collapsed. It was a retaining wall built vertically. And the concrete block wall had collapsed, and a group of us put in a bid to redo it out of dry stone. And our competing bid was concrete block wall replacement. And fortunately, we got the job. So learning about things on a municipal scale, I can't remember how long the project was, pretty significant. I want to say maybe 100 feet or more, 6 feet tall, dry stone retaining wall, huge stones, the biggest possible ones we could get in the wall, often two-person stones. Caps were set with equipment. That was a fantastic municipal project to work on. And then I worked on one for the city of Lexington that Richard Tufnell was the project manager and probably consultant for that, and that was bridge abutments. There's a river going through Lexington, Kentucky. I want to say it was the Town Branch River, and the dry stone walls had eventually fallen down into the river, and so we stripped them out, and some of the stones were boulder size set with equipment next to the bridge. This is like a highway bridge. And then we also were standing in the water redoing retaining walls with smaller size stones. So it was really fantastic to work on municipal projects back in that era, learning about how do you do those big scale projects properly, for them to last long and look good. And we did a couple of entranceways for the city of Lexington, mixing two types of stone. And I was just a hired hand.
How did you find the sort of interaction between the other professionals on those kind of projects? Because I think that's a problem that's developing as their knowledge has kind of diminished.
Yeah. Well, in that era, which is the mid to late 1990s, early 2000s, there was some excitement because of this energy about the dry stone revival there. Landscape architects were involved, the Army Corps of Engineers, that's the organization that's involved with construction if it's in a waterway here in the United States. There was some excitement about that, and so the Kentucky Department of Transportation, in Louisville it was the city parks who made the decision for Tufnell to redo that wall, and its competing bid was to replace it with concrete. So all those municipalities, there was some awareness, hey, we've got this thing going on, how do we fix these to look good and last and honor the historic nature of what those were. So those municipalities then, what I feel like is happening now so far as municipal scale organizations and best known practices in stonework is that a disconnect exists where the ways that we know to select and use stone to shape it and how we build with it, the ways that make things last the longest, that are irrefutable. For example, if you open up the book of World Heritage Sites and look at the photographs, it's irrefutable evidence of how do you build stonework to last. Many of those stone structures are thousands and thousands of years old, and they have commonalities that have allowed them to last that long. So if we look at that, if we look at the quantified material written down by different dry stone walling organizations in different countries, Canada, Australia, Great Britain, France, different countries around the world that have drawings and specific things written about how do you put these together on a durability thing. That information from World Heritage Sites and those organizations does not exist in most of what's taught here about civil engineering projects involving stone, what's designed here, and what gets inspected. Inspectors have to be looking at a book of building codes to know corners should be woven. And much of this extends to mortared stonework, as well as dry stonework. So for whatever reason, the knowledge base of best known practices has not made it into the education and building requirements in the ways that exist for manufactured products like concrete block or brick or things like that, where there are specific things written, like staggering joints. That's probably in most building codes. You can't have all your bricks share a joint all the way up the wall. They got to be offset. But that doesn't exist for stonework, at least not in. And I've done my research. It's anyhow. So that's one of my interests is in trying to figure out ways to help provide irrefutable evidence of best known practices. What makes stonework last the longest possible that we have examples on here on Earth? And how about instead of the decline in the knowledge in the building, how about taking it through the leveling off thing and then getting us back up to where we used to be, building phenomenal, beautiful structures that are educational and inspirational that can last thousands of years instead of the short-term thing of things just falling apart because people don't know.
That's a major challenge for people within the stone trade to somehow address that. Somehow I don't think it's up to the other professions to learn. I think it's a challenge for us to try and educate them on those practices. How that happens, I'm not 100% sure. I think I said to you the last day, I've had a way behind a rock pile for 30 years and kind of raising my head above the rock pile doesn't come easily for me. So, but there are things I want to say which I don't think are being said.
I think you and I share that, and only from doing all that work with the rocks would I be able to have the perspective that I do. After seeing all of the range of things I've seen with stone and thinking about it and talking about it with stonemasons and what I've learned and read and that, I think only that background could get me where I am now, where I feel like there are some changes that I feel like need to happen.
There must be the opportunity to open up other people's eyes for the potential for the craft and how it can be expanded. If you're creative, if you think about it creatively.
But open it up wider so in peripheral vision they can look at World Heritage sites, and other things like astronomy. Just to broaden it a little bit and to get in there and fight for the change that must happen in academia, in municipalities, those kinds of things. And for better and worse, what I've gone through here next to the Santa Fe River has been a phenomenal learning experience. It is a metaphor for me of what goes on globally. When civil engineers and landscape architects and municipalities and contractors, when those people get left with the decision making about how stonework is built, it seems like the examples of disasters are in the tens of thousands, if not millions globally. And there's no reason for that. There's no reason to disregard. It's not like we're saying the earth is flat or something crazy.
No.
We're able to point to specific things. Iconic, everybody knows about the pyramids and Stonehenge and Machu Picchu and Angkor Wat and, Zimbabwe. All of these things are real physical examples of what, from my perspective, should be done with stonework. The concrete block industry determines much of what happens with retaining walls. And for whatever reason, when I look through my World Heritage site, there's no concrete block retaining walls in there. It's funny. I've gone through every single country. I know every single site in the world that they have designated, and there is not a single concrete block structure. So for that industry to have so much sway over municipal projects and stuff, I feel like, I'm sorry, they might be making a lot of money at it, but I lose sleep over it. So the change must happen. Look at the longest lasting stonework in the world. Almost every single stone structure has something to teach, even if it's just the methodology. But I think more importantly, some of the other things that are taught, for example, specific to astronomy. Even if you just set a stone structure so that it faces north, south, east, west. But then when you start thinking about marking the 18 and a half year lunar cycle on the horizon, or the solar cycle on the horizon. Some cultures have used stonework to mark constellations that were part of their mythologies of astronomy. Those educational components, I think that's really important. Chaco Canyon, almost every single structure individually marks solar and lunar cardinal directions, but also the buildings in relation to one another over huge spans of distance are aligned with cardinal directions, the solar markings, and the lunar markings in particular. So the scale of an entire, more or less, civilization where every structure on its own has that educational component, and then in relation to structures out of eyesight, where that alignment is also there. I think that educational component, in tandem with creativity and with sound methodology, those are kind of the three areas of emphasis that I think could use the most support in the trade.
And do you see any kind of association that's kind of working towards that you would kind of support, that would be something you could buy into, promote that to push it forward?
Not that I know of. Other than all my peers on whose shoulder I cry when I lament that, that this scenario is what it is. I don't know of a specific association with that goal. I think other organizations have some sort of tangential goals. All of those organizations trying to teach best known practices in dry stone, for example, that's towards that goal. It doesn't fulfill the spectrum of it, but teaching good building practices, the ones you all have there's lots in Europe. Here in North America, there's several. The Stone Trust in Vermont, they're really doing good work on teaching good practices. Tomas Lip's Stone Foundation, based here in Santa Fe, that does a lot, I think, to promote the craft of stonemasonry, carvings, mortared, dry stone, through his annual symposiums and his magazine, Stone Nexus. So, there are different organizations that are doing parts of that. And maybe the UNESCO in some way, by documenting the oldest known stone sites, but no, I can't think of one that's doing all of that. Maybe that means tag I'm in. I'm gonna have to start that.
Well, maybe I'll tag on along beside you.
Great.
But maybe that's something that needs to be kind of thought about. What is the plan for the trade for the next 50 years? What should its end goal be? And perhaps, interacting with those other professionals that are really, really required to keep the sort of stone trade alive within the built environment. Maybe that's, we could put that idea out there and see if it resonates with anybody.
Yeah, and it might be that some of the existing organizations could expand into that.
Yeah.
Maybe the Stone Trust in Vermont, they do a lot of outreach on different aspects of dry stone, and your all's organizations there, Dry Stonewalling Association. Certainly, I think Tomas's organization, Stone Foundation, they help promote good stonemasonry. So maybe some of those organizations could have a satellite endeavor.
The one that resonates most with myself is Thomas's Stone Foundation. I like the kind of wide kind of remit that he has set up. And within my kind of Winston Churchill report, it's one of the things I've kind of got as a kind of aim or a goal would be to kind of set up a UK branch of the foundation. I think something that had a kind of a wider remit would be great. That kind of could bring in all the different, bring in all the different aspects of the stone trade. And the podcast is some sort of way towards thinking about that and trying to engage other people with that idea.
Yeah, I think, his magazine, I think of it as sort of an international based focus of that magazine, because the articles in stonemasonry pretty consistently has a global perspective. And I don't know of other magazines dedicated to stonework, that have that kind of global perspective, usually really high quality pictures, interesting articles. So yeah, I could see that in many ways has inspired me to think about global, because I've been seeing his magazine since I very first started. Those were floating around Kentucky. In fact, there was an article in one of them about the dry stone work in Kentucky that was in Stone Nexus. So yeah, I think his magazine probably has also helped me think about the stonework on a global perspective. For
So
sure.
certainly the Stone Foundation is one of the things that kind of inspired my Winston Churchill travels, was the desire to go to one of his symposiums.
Mm-hmm.
And I looked for funding and gained the funding from the Winston Churchill Memorial Trust, which allowed me to do the travels. I was supposed to be going to one of the symposiums, but it was actually cancelled the year that I was due to be going. But it did give me the opportunity to gain the funding and then meet up with Thomas and some of the other people within the Stone Foundation. So it's certainly a vehicle that I really admire, and what he's achieved is something, ultimately I would hope to kind of build upon.
Yeah, it really is. Tomas hosted the Stone Symposium one year in Asheville, North Carolina, and I happened to live in the town just east of Asheville at that time. So that's when I first met him, and they had a dry stone walling workshop, lots of presenters. Some was on historic stonework, some on carving, on lettering. So it was a fantastic diversity of presenters. This past year, which was 2020, the 20th anniversary of the Stone Symposium's first get together, which was here in Santa Fe, that was supposed to happen last fall, but because of the pandemic, that got canceled and has been postponed. Hopefully, if things go better than they have recently, that by this fall, this coming October of 2021, hopefully we'll be able to have the 20th anniversary Stone Symposium right here in Santa Fe.
That would be great to attend that. Well, I've taken up quite a bit of your time, Joe. What's the sort of immediate plans for the future for yourself? What projects have you got on?
Well, my focus right now is threefold. One, I still do installations, primarily residential. I have a dry stone retaining wall project with steps and flatwork underway here in Santa Fe, so I still do installations. I'm revising a manual that I wrote on dry stone masonry, and I've hired a professional science writer and editor to help me update, revise, improve manual that I wrote several years ago. So that project I have underway this winter right now. And then this past summer, I think it was in August, I received a patent for the three-dimensional dry stone arch puzzle that I designed and used in classrooms for years. And so I'm trying to find out ways that I can mass produce the three-dimensional stone arch puzzle and sell it, or in some way distribute it as an educational tool. I have kindergarten through 12th grade lesson plans that go along with it. So that's kind of my three-stage. I'm still wrestling big rocks in the dirt and working on the manual, and then trying to get my puzzle out there.
You're a busy man. You're a busy man, and you've been doing and you've been doing some writing as well, I believe. A few articles coming up.
Yes, yeah. I wrote an article on dry stone masonry in the Western United States for Stone Trust. That just came out in their fall newsletter. And then I'm working, in addition to the manual, I'm writing 3 articles simultaneously, one on the dry stone furnaces of Appalachia that were used to melt iron. I'm writing one on the Ruthwell Cross there in Scotland near Dumfries. It's a historic cross that has Bible story carvings, runes, and Latin. Pretty unique. And then I'm also writing one about the Stone Trust, about what that organization is and what they do. They're based in Vermont here in the United States.
Yeah, I was very impressed with the Stone Trust when I went to see them.
Yeah, fantastic outfit. And then the other writing I'm doing, I'm trying to put together a professional development training to do continuing education work with civil engineering, architects, landscape architects, building codes inspectors, municipalities, to try and start to add best known practices for stonework, whether it's mortared or dry stone, or to improve or in some way start to get what's taught and in paperwork with stonework, try and raise the bar. So I'm trying to put together information on stonework specific to those trades.
Well, I think everything that you're doing is kind of very, very important to try and get the word out. So more kind of power to your arm for that.
Great, David. Well, I sure appreciate your work, and I really respect your passion for the range of things that have to do with stone. And your writings, your book, our mutual friend Peter Schaffsma gave that to me a couple of years ago, and reading that about your travels here and your thoughts about enclosures, that really resonated with me.
Yeah,
so
yeah.
likewise, that's a mutual admiration.
Good, excellent. Well, we'll just leave it there, and hopefully we'll meet up at some point.
Yeah, so I look forward to it.
We'll sign off. Bye-bye.
Okay. All right, great. Take care.